To this side event. Very pleased to see so many people in the room, and my experience is also that in the first couple of minutes more people generally join, so thanks a lot for coming. We have a very exciting, I think, side event, very exciting program today, linking the INDCs, or the priorities and ambitions in INDCs, to the global action agenda. We have a number of distinguished panelists, which I will introduce to you by the time they will actually start their presentation. My name is Pieter Pauw. I work at the German Development Institute in Bonn, and I'll be chairing this session. And first give like a mini presentation. So just to better see how climate action can address priorities and ambitions in INDCs, we first need to understand, of course, the priorities and ambitions in INDCs. So we've done a huge analysis on INDCs recently. There are some flyers on the chairs next to you, actually. First, a short, like a brief history of INDCs for those who are not familiar to it, and for those who are familiar to it, it will be very short, so don't worry. INDCs were discussed and decided upon in 2013 in Warsaw at the negotiations in Warsaw. And then in 2014 in Lima, the basic idea was that the COP would come up with guidance on what should be in an INDC and how should it be formulated. That guidance was very sparse because countries had difficulties in agreeing on the content of INDCs, in particular on whether adaptation should be in there or not, for example. So just to give you an example of the kind of language or the kind of guidance that was given to countries to formulate their INDCs, this is paragraph 14 that says, INDCs may include, as appropriate, inter alia, so very much the negotiation language, of course, mitigation, and how the party considers that its INDC is fair and ambitious in the light of national circumstances. Then in 2015, so just before the COP, almost every party actually managed to submit its INDC, and they become a cornerstone for the Paris Agreement, a very important cornerstone. And then in Paris, it was agreed that INDCs would be renewed every 5 years. So in 2020, we are all expecting the INDC 2.0, basically, and that should help to create ever more ambition. So what we've done an analysis together with ACT in Kenya, with the UNFCCC Secretariat, and as a contribution to the NDC partnership, we've done an analysis of the content of all INDCs in terms of 5 main categories. So mitigation, adaptation, finance and support, planning and process, and also the broader picture. So how do INDCs link up to, for example, to SDGs, to fossil fuel subsidy reform, but also to gender issues. So just to give you an impression of some of the priorities and ambitions in INDCs, this is where we looked at, so this is basically a screenshot from the tool, which has gone online today, so you can also visit it yourself. This is where we've looked at the preparation of INDCs and the ways in which stakeholders were involved. And as you can see at the dark blue colors, there's many countries who describe the kind of stakeholders they involved in the INDC formulation process, and there's 42 of them that actually involved the private sector in the formulation of the INDC. Or consulted them in any case. And of course, ideally, this would be mutually reinforcing, because ideally, you would have a government sitting together with the private sector, and private sector saying, well, why don't you increase your ambition? Because we can also do A, B, C, and D, and that's our contribution. However, there's also a risk, of course, that the private sector says, sorry, this very ambition you actually formulated is impossible. We cannot mitigate that much. We cannot adapt that much. So please turn down the ambition, you know? So that's something we will discuss in this panel later on. Just a second example, we also looked at mitigation costs. And then there are 64 parties that include mitigation costs or partial mitigation costs, sometimes in very elaborate manners, and sometimes just a number thrown out there where you wonder, where does this number come from? But it adds up to $3 trillion almost until 2030. And you see that much of the cost indications are coming from the global south. Then on technology needs, which is of course very important if you work with non-state actors as well, many countries include technology needs. So many mention technologies as such, and many also include specific technology needs. We did not include the specific needs in our tool because that would be too difficult because you have thousands of different technologies in I don't know how many sectors, but it gives an indication of the importance of technology. And then this is the second last, I think, because I just wanted to give an impression and an introduction to this session rather than launch the tool, which will actually happen on Tuesday. This is how climate risks are included in the INDC. So there are 93 parties, I should say, not countries, who mention specific extreme weather risks. And this is mostly flash floods and droughts. And you can also see in the tool which kind of climate risks they mention. And of course, this is not something governments only have to address. This is something that the private sector has to address as well, the non-states, or the non-states, I should say. And then finally, and just as in the last slide, you see that there's a big gap between what the global north describes in their INDCs and what the global south describes in their INDCs. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the global north wanted NDCs to be very much about mitigation, and the global south said, no, adaptation is a huge priority for us. So just as an example, this is the agricultural sector, and we include how the agricultural sector is included in the INDCs. And you see that it's a priority sector, agriculture. So yeah, the tool will be launched next week on Tuesday. Thanks a lot for your attention. And now, after this kind of limited introduction to the priorities and ambitions set in the NDCs, we now move on to Sundar Jain, who is my dear colleague at the German Development Institute. He's a steering committee member of the Galvanizing the Groundswell network, and he's one of the leading experts in the non-state action field in climate change. So Sundar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. So how can we seize the opportunity of the groundswell of non-state and subnational climate actions to meet the demands emerging from NDCs, as Peter just showed? I would like to elaborate on this question now. If climate governance has ever been the domain of governments, of governments alone, in the run-up to Paris, we saw the emergence of a true groundswell of transnational actions by businesses and investors, NGOs and faith communities, and cities and regions. I speak of a groundswell because of the rapid growing number of transnational actions. The largest platform for transnational actions, the UNFCCC's Non-State Actor Zone for Climate Action, Nazca, launched in 2014, now already records more than 12,000 of such actions. To be sure, many other transnational actions may exist under the radar and are not yet recorded. The potential, so now we need to talk about, so why do we need to talk about transnational action? I would like to point out two reasons. First, transnational climate actions could make a much needed additional contribution to government actions. NDCs could significantly narrow down the 12 gigaton emissions gap that would keep us on track to limit global warming to 2 degrees. However, taken together, they would still translate into 3 or more degrees warming and result in adverse impacts for a majority of people and a high risk of irreversible ecological and economic disruptions. This is where transnational actions could come in. They could further narrow the gap, narrow the global emissions gap. They could demonstrate to governments what is possible, and in so doing, create pressure for higher national commitments. In a recent assessment of only 19 large-scale transnational initiatives, their potential has been estimated at 9 to 11 gigaton, bringing the 2 degrees limit in sight. If only for these functional reasons, we need to pay attention to transnational action. Moreover, transnational climate action also makes non-mitigation contributions. For instance, climate action on clean cooking stoves also frees up time from collecting wood, allowing girls more time to go to school, improving health, as people are no longer exposed to fumes. In other words, climate action is also sustainable development action. The second reason why we need to talk about transnational climate governance is that governments in Paris agreed to a pre-2020 agenda, which entails the institutionalization of transnational linkages. The COP decision included the appointment of 2 high-level climate action champions, and non-state party stakeholders were encouraged to record their climate actions on Nazca. And last Tuesday, this COP saw the launch of global climate action. With all the emphasis on transnational actions, we need to ask some critical questions. Not unlike national commitments, transnational commitments are promises. Will they be kept? And how effective are transnational climate actions? Evidence on effectiveness from the transnational realm is relatively scarce. The only large N study of ex-post effectiveness of climate actions to date, looking at the output performance of transnational actions that were launched in 2014, suggests that many produce fitting outputs, increasing the likelihood they will eventually produce desired environmental and behavioral impacts. This compares relatively favorably to the wider realm of transnational actions in sustainable development. Notwithstanding, transnational actions should not only deliver outputs, they need to have desired environmental impacts. Moreover, the lack of tracking of the effectiveness of transnational climate actions may open the door for greenwashing, as businesses and other actors can now freely declare what they would like to do without ever following up. I'm here, however, also to address another question, namely geographic distribution of transnational climate actions. Can transnational actions deliver in an
We go on this.
Oh.
Failure in the program. Are you okay with your slides?
I need the slides, so sorry.
Sorry, there's a problem with the computer.
Okay.
Oh, no, it's...
Anyway, I also would like to address the geographic distribution of transnational action. Can transnational actions deliver in an equitable manner? The divide between developing and developed countries has structured agreement and disagreement in traditional climate politics. The gap between North and South is, however, much less questioned when it comes to the transnational realm of climate actions. This is remarkable, considering their great potential. Questions such as, where will benefits of these actions accrue and who are the beneficiaries would seem quite salient. Imbalances in the transnational realm may soon undermine legitimacy of transnational engagement in the UNFCCC. This is not only a political problem, it would also lead to a less effective global climate governance. So what are these imbalances? In a recent paper by me and my colleague who is sitting over there, Harro van Asselt from the University of Eastern Finland, we suggested to look first at whether governments support and enable transnational linkages. Then we look at leadership in initiating and coordinating transnational climate actions. Third, we looked at who participates in transnational climate actions. Fourth, we looked at where transnational actions are implemented, and finally, whether they perform across developing and developed countries. We subsequently reviewed current research on imbalances across developing and developed countries, and in the following, I very briefly present some findings. First, we see a growing political support for greater engagement of transnational actors within the UNFCCC process. Initially advocated by the US and the EU, developing countries increasingly speak appreciatively about transnational engagement. However, in national submissions between 2012 and 2015, several developing countries have argued that transnational climate action should not detract from obligations of developed countries. Moreover, transnational climate action should not lead to additional burdens for developing countries. Finally, several countries have expressed concerns over sovereignty rather than competing with the international process. Transnational climate actions should be part of national contributions. So all things considered, however, the political support for transnational linkages has been growing. Regarding leadership, current studies show a highly imbalanced pattern, close to 0 to just over 2% of transnational actions are led by developing country-based actors. In terms of participatory patterns, we see a more mixed picture. On the one hand, a lot of transnational actions include developing country-based actors. However, the proportion of developing country-based actors is generally low. Regarding the implementation of climate action, we see a more balanced pattern and even a slight emphasis towards developing countries. However, this may still not be in proportion to the burden that developing countries carry in terms of negative impacts of climate change. Moreover, most of this data is based on self-reported data by transnational initiatives themselves, on whether they plan to implement, not on where they actually develop operations, with the exception of a recent study I collaborated in. We found that the implementation gap between planned and actual implementation is actually much greater in developing countries, in particular the least developed ones. Transnational climate actions initially seem to respond to the needs in developing countries, but when it comes down to actual implementation, they back out. Finally, we look at the performance across North and South. Current scholarship doesn't provide a conclusive answer to whether transnational actions in the Global South perform better or worse. Many intervening factors influence the performance of transnational initiatives in their location. For instance, one study comes to the finding that transnational sustainability initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa perform above average. However, this might also be due to the active role that UN organizations play as leading partners. So more research is necessary to better understand how developing country contexts relate to effectiveness. Now, how can we explain these imbalances? We first need to consider the possibility of selection biases, both in research and policy making, in particular towards national climate actions with high mitigation potential, and incidentally involving a lot of North-based multinational corporations. Also, a lot of the scholarship on transnational climate governance is in Europe and North America. This is an urgent reason to build North-South research partnerships. However, findings on imbalances across different samples are so persuasive that geographically imbalanced transnational governance cannot easily be explained away by mere selection bias. Geographic imbalances can be due to agency-based outcomes. For instance, transnational initiatives aiming at impacts may choose to focus on emerging countries, such as China and India, instead of least developed or smaller developing countries. Moreover, actors in developing countries may lack transnational capacity to act and connect in intercultural, international, and intersectoral environments. The imbalanced geography of transnational actions may also relate to a global political economy that is structured to consolidate powerful and often North-based actors, which marginalizes the developing world. Decision-making power resides with North-based actors and perpetuates and possibly aggravates North-South disparities. So, finally, what can we do about this? Geographically imbalanced transnational climate governance is not easily remedied, but there are some opportunities to encourage developing country-based transnational actors to participate in climate actions. International organizations have a key role to play in mobilizing actors from the Global South. For instance, the UNFCCC Secretariat's Momentum for Change initiative highlights transnational actions with a development edge and links up South-based actors to transnational peers and resources. The emerging framework for global climate action and the appointed high-level climate action champions should prioritize transnational climate action in the Global South. The post-Paris climate governance architecture also provides opportunities as most NDCs put forward by developing countries set conditional targets, which may only be fulfilled through transnational action and international cooperation. Development actors should coordinate efforts to promote NDC implementation in developing countries to ensure the maximum fulfillment of NDCs in developing countries. However, this is not enough. Non-state climate action should also incentivize higher ambition at the national level, for instance, by demonstrating solutions that can be implemented at the national scale. Currently, the technical examination processes under the UNFCCC are held at conferences such as these. However, we need similar processes tailored to specific regions and countries to ensure regional and national characteristics match with the optimal solutions for these countries. And our colleague Paula Ellinger and Dania Engström will also speak more on this. Finally, we need to embed transnational climate action into broader strategies towards sustainable development. I'm glad to announce the One Agenda conference on the margins of the Bonn Spring Session next year to discuss precisely this topic. So thank you for your attention. And for more information, please do not hesitate to reach me. And I hand it over to Pieter again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sander, for your presentation. It was very rich in information. I think what you pointed out very well is the vast potential that non-state action could have, but also the risk of greenwashing and the difference, of course, the unbalances when it comes to regions, to sectors, and to research as well. We continue to the next. Oh wait, actually, I should say. Are there any questions for clarification or any comments or anything you would like to share? I mean, at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session, of course, because we like to collect ideas and have your input as well. But are there any questions for clarification so far? There are none. Then, in that case, I should still make one announcement. Because this is live streamed, so our communication department sitting in Bonn was keen on that I should say, and he's probably laughing now, but I should say that the tool that I presented is a COP22 preview version. So many of the features like the bar charts, the country files, but also the zooming in, for example, they do not function properly yet, but they will all function in 2 weeks or so. Thanks. Then we move on to the next presentation. Associate Professor Idil Boran from the York University in Canada. She's a philosopher, and she is specializing, or is specialized already, I should say, in global governance on climate action. And you will present more about the importance of trust when public and private actors want to cooperate and on ambitions for climate action. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, and thank you everyone for being here. So what I want to do, I want to take a few moments to reflect on some of the key issues that we heard in the last two presentations before we move on to the next phase of the panel. And what I want to talk about is about some of the challenges concerning building pathways of ambitious climate action through a diversity of actors, of climate actors. And so one of the distinctive features of the implementation of the Paris Agreement is the broadening of the sphere of climate action, as we have heard. And so, of course, the national contributions are provided by parties; they're the main players, but non-party actors have now an active role in the collective effort in ratcheting up ambition. So I want to specify very briefly that non-party actors, it's a very broad category of of actors. They include cities, so sub-state actors, and they also include non-party actors in the sense that that would be the private sector and civil society, research organizations, etc. So this is a very large group. And also the other thing that's worth highlighting is that the contribution to the effort that this diversity of actors can provide is entirely cross-cutting, in the sense that that would include mitigation, adaptation efforts, finance, etc. So what we have is that we have a broadening of the sphere of climate action, and a broader and more inclusive sphere presents tremendous potential for enhancing ambition. But this also requires reflecting on the conditions that will catalyze collective efforts and build trust between actors. And although the potential it presents is very compelling, there are some real challenges, and it is worth focusing on what those real challenges are so that we can best tackle them. So, for example, when all non-party actors are taken into consideration, what we see is that there is a huge amount of expertise that lies out there. And so the challenge is to reach that expertise, and to also for actors to reach the relevant expertise across sectorial boundaries. So this is not actually a small challenge, and the rewards would be very important. But the challenge of reaching to the expertise and to find the right pathways is a very important challenge that really is worth thinking about on how to overcome. For example, in managing, let's say, for example, in managing the risks of extreme weather, which is an important component of climate action, as we heard from Peter's presentation, we know that there is expertise that would have to be tapped into. That it would be in the private sector, in civil society, etc. So the problem then is to reach that and to find the right pathways. But what I really want to emphasize is that merely encouraging the actors to collaborate or to work together may not be sufficient to create those pathways and to reach the relevant know-how and expertise and capacity that we need for ambitious effort. So merely inviting or merely encouraging is not going to be enough. What we need to do is to understand what stands in the way of an effective collaboration, even when there is all the best intentions to collaborate. Because one thing that we need to recognize is that the different actors often have very different practices and different concerns and different goals and different ways of working with or building expertise. And so the compatibility may not immediately be there. So this is something that would have to be worked on to make sure that the collaborative pathways become available to facilitate those pathways. And one factor that stands in the way of cooperation in this way is what is known as asymmetries of information. So when one side has a specific kind of expertise that the other side does not have, or a know-how or skill set, then what happens is that if one side has expertise that the other doesn't, or the other has another set of expertise that the other side doesn't have in a collaborative situation, what happens is that it puts one side of the collaborative effort in a weaker position. And when both sides find themselves in that situation of not having access to the information that's available on the other side, then that is the sort of asymmetry of information that can sap the trust level between the the collaborating sides. And so this is actually a very well understood phenomenon. The technical term for this is asymmetric information, but it's something that is worth reflecting on how to overcome it, because it can happen in very subtle ways, and the reward of overcoming this sort of information asymmetries would be really considerable. So this is what brings me to the issue of trust, and to the importance of thinking about strategies to build trust between actors and between the different types of expertise that the different actors can bring onto the global effort. Now, in this process, transparency plays a very important role, and that's why the transparency platform of the Paris Agreement is extremely important. But we need to go deeper in order to understand the challenges. We need to go deeper into the root causes of what stands in the way of having greater trust. And so I want to say just a few words about trust. We tend to think it's a very common, very commonly invoked concept. It's very important, but we have a particular way of thinking about trust. We tend to think about it as some kind of sentiment or feeling, like a feeling of trusting someone. But trust can also be viewed as a feature of a policy architecture. It can be embedded in policies. It can be a virtue of best practices. And so we don't have to focus on it just as some kind of feeling between agents, but we can actually reflect on it, on how it can be embedded in the architecture that serves a facilitating role to enhance collaborative action. And but we cannot really hope that this will happen just by itself. It would have to be worked out collectively. And a very good way of doing that is to reflect on how to collectively work on building trust in the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. Now, the implementation of the Paris Agreement is also, and it's mainly, about developing guidelines and principles of inclusive cooperation based on key virtues of non-adversarial and inclusive, non-punitive and facilitative dialogue between parties. And this is what is at the center stage of the implementation. Now at COP22 in Marrakesh and forward. Now, moving forward in building synergies between parties and non-party actors, and to promote the conditions of mutual trust, a dialogue-based process that involves non-party actors, very much like the facilitative sharing of views that we have between parties, and very much like the stock takes that we have between parties, but a facilitative dialogue-based process that involves non-parties would present a very important potential for building these conditions. And so in closing, I want to check how much time I have. Maybe Peter can assist me. Yeah. Yes, 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm closing perfectly. In closing, then, I want to make a brief reference to the remarks made by high-level climate champion Ambassador Laurence Tubiana in a side event that occurred 2 days ago here in this room. And it was on enhancing ambition and promoting implementation of the Paris Agreement on and the role of non-state actors. So in it, Ambassador Tubiana highlighted this process that has been launched in Marrakesh, and it was also mentioned by Sundar, which actually creates a dialogue process, bringing governments, mayors, private sectors, and civil society in the sharing of visions. So it is something akin to the sharing of views. to facilitate the sharing of views, but it really involves the non-state actors. And I think this presents a very useful, an extremely important moment to reflect on how to integrate the non-state actors through the dialogue process in order to really just embed it in the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. So, and with that, I will close and leave the conversation to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idil. Was a great presentation. I particularly found it interesting how you say mixed expertise and lack of information can be real barriers towards cooperation. And I liked your statement on how trust building or how trust is more than just a sentiment. And if you really want to build trust, that you have to, you kind of have to embed it in a policy framework as well. Unless there are any questions for clarification, I would move on to the next presentation, which is provided by Daniel Stenson from, he's a climate policy analyst at Forest, a think tank in Sweden, small but important think tank in Sweden. And he's a PhD candidate at the IVM, the Institute for Environmental Studies at the VU University in Amsterdam. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all for coming here. Yeah, this is work that I've been doing together with my colleague Oscar Widerberg, who's in the room as well, who is also at the IVM Amsterdam. And this is work that we have been doing over the last 2 years. I'd say we've got something at Forest, which we call the Reference Group for International Climate Policy, where we bring together business, academia, government officials to discuss various issues related to international climate policy. So we've done one policy brief and one report before Paris, and now today we have a new policy brief which we hope to build on towards further research that is on the theme of linking state, non-state and subnational climate action and the case of Sweden. So this policy brief is available on the Forest webpage and at the, not the IVM webpage, but a blog link to it at least. What we've done is that you all know about the Nazca Platform now with more than 12,000 commitments. We've got a sample here, which was based on data a few weeks ago, where we would have 11,600 commitments from 140 countries. And as we saw from earlier presentation, it is a concentration in, let's say, OECD countries, and that is also obvious when looking at the top 15 countries with non-state subnational commitments. And this is the number of actors with commitments in the Nazca database. And of course, you see that the US is at number 1, which is perhaps no surprise. Italy comes in second, and that's of course great for Italy, but it's also a case of the Covenant of Mayors being very well represented in Italy. So 90% of these actors are within the Covenant of Mayors initiatives. And then we noticed, perhaps not of coincidence only, but Sweden comes in as number 7, and compared to many of the other countries, Sweden is smaller, and they still rank quite high. And when looking at, let's say, actors per capita, Sweden is actually number 1. So we thought we should take the opportunity, given the experience we have of this reference group, where we bring together businesses and also with some access to policymakers, to dig a bit deeper into why is it that Sweden ranks high in such a comparison. And then we looked comparing Sweden to neighboring countries and similar sized countries in Europe, and one can again see here when it comes to cities and companies, Swedish non-state actors seem to be willing to engage in these sort of actions, the Lima Paris Action Agenda, the Nazca Platform, even compared to such a large country as Germany. And so why is this? I think we've identified 3 reasons. The first 2 ones perhaps are a bit general, but I'd say that in Sweden and of course many other countries, the Swedish business is quite positive towards climate action, which helps, of course. And then there is somewhat of a tradition of non-state actors gathering in different initiatives, collaborating. We've got something called Haag-initiativet, which is a number of let's say, spearhead businesses who's aiming for no emissions until I think 2030. We've got municipalities gathering, etc. But the thing we looked more into is an initiative called the Fossil-Free Sweden, and it's a government-led initiative launched before Paris, and it is to some extent a national replica of what we saw with the Nazca Platform and the Lima Paris Action Agenda, sort of a top-down movement trying to harness the action coming from bottom up. So I guess there is some sort of irony in having a government organize a non-state action initiative, but that is what's happening globally and nationally. And in these initiatives, we've got now 200 actors. That's businesses, municipalities, cities, and also a number of civil society organizations. And they are signing a declaration that they want to help Sweden to become one of the world's first fossil-free welfare nations. And this is somewhat vague and will be so for another couple of months before the government quantify what this means. But a cross-parliamentarian investigation suggested that this means 75% emission reductions to 2045, and with the remainder being absorbed by different sort of sinks, so net neutral in 2045. Sorry. So when speaking to officials on this initiative, they see that there are 2 aims with this sort of initiative. The first one is to help fulfill this ambition, and that's linked to, I'd say, the bridging the emission gap. Hopefully, by engaging these non-state actors, we will see direct emission reductions that will help us reach or even overshoot our NDCs. But there's also the perhaps more vague, creating a narrative that makes it look inevitable to make future bold decisions leading in the right direction. And I think that's also something that we saw on a global level before Paris, that having all these business leaders coming to Paris saying we need more action, put pressure on political leaders. And I say that the Fossil-Free Sweden is, compared to the Nazca Platform, a lot less lax on formal criteria. You sign up to the declaration, you need no individual emission reductions commitment, etc. And one of the reasons for this is that they are, at the moment at least, seem to be more keen on creating this narrative. But linking back to the picture before, they also encourage the actors joining the Fossil-Free Sweden to sign up for Nazca. So there is a direct link between these 2 initiatives, and given that it's still fairly few actors in each country, if you're having, as for this case, 40 actors joining the Fossil-Free Sweden and then signing up for Nazca, you will see an impact on the global numbers. So we've got 3 conclusions and perhaps subject for further research. And one is this, and I hope we can discuss this more, creating a narrative. To what extent does it work? We hear that it is very important to engage all these actors and to create a momentum. But to what extent does this work? And also, I think it's important to discuss, when discussing the different rules or degree of formalization of the non-organization of the non-state actors, I think that depends on what sort of aim do you have. Are you aiming for direct emission reductions that would help bridge the emission gap? Well, then probably you will need more formalized regulation. Are you aiming to create a narrative? Well, then the degree of formalization is perhaps not as important. And then another conclusion that we made, or let's say the people we interviewed made, was that these kind of initiatives are rather easy to initiate. You tell someone to set up a platform, and then you will have hopefully a large number of actors signing up to it. And that's what happened to Sweden. And then after a while, all these actors start having expectations. Okay, so now we're on the web page. What happens next? We want to be more engaged, and then you enter into a process where you need to set aside personnel, resources. How do you let's say, bring this enthusiasm on? How do you make more out of this than just having them on a web page? And I think that is something that on a global level they've been struggling with, but also doing progress on. And I think for different sort of national initiatives like this, that's also something that needs to be planned for. So that's my rather quick through of what we've done. I'm here, Oscar is here if you've got more questions. I'd say concerning the Nazca numbers, Oscar is the one who's been doing most of the work. So if you have any particular questions on that, I'd rather refer them to Oscar. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for this excellent presentation on the Swedish case. We have another case for you. So let me introduce the final speaker today, which is Paula Ellinger from the Avina Foundation. Paula is responsible for the climate action program there. And it's very much in the first stage, as far as I understand, like a platform that stimulates climate action in Latin America. And what I find particularly interesting, that you're trying to attract actors that are currently by no means, let's say, integrated in or part of the huge conference that we're having here. So you're really trying to bring new actors on board. Would be fantastic if you could also say something on how the trust building in your exercise works, because I think the input by Daniel was also very important here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I think it's a great opportunity to interact and discuss these issues. So I would like to start by saying I'm very happy to see these issues being put on the table, and especially the analysis that Sundar makes and the points of the divide between the North and the Global South in this action agenda. I think this is an important point that we have to discuss more and find which are the approaches to tackle it. So as we saw on the NDC Explorer, the reported conditions from the Global South vary very much from the North-South, in terms of technical and resources needed to implement the NDCs, but also in terms of the risks that need to be tackled. This means we need action from the Global South. And I think the analysis by Sundar shows that we are still far away from that. So from this diagnosis that we share, at Fundación Avina, we started thinking, how can we tackle that from Latin America? That's where we are based. There are different types of gaps, and I also like very much, Sundar, your analysis of the different types of gaps that go from leadership, political gaps, institutional capacities, expertise, and connections to the global arenas. And how could we tackle that? What we are building right now, it's a platform to accelerate climate action in Latin America. It doesn't follow the sectorial approach. It follows a regional approach. It's an open platform for non-state actors working on different teams in Latin America and that are not yet directly connected to global arenas or even to more strong regional and thematical initiatives. What we are doing is working throughout the life cycle of commitments, mobilizing non-state actors to formalize commitments, building with them action plans, working with them on mobilizing seed capital to implement that, and monitoring and tracking the commitments made. We are working mainly with networks or coalitions that themselves connect to the actors on the ground. And we are finding that the best way to approach is really demand-driven, because the needs are very different from each of the actors. And I'll share 2 or 3 examples now and how this connects to the NDCs. Right, that's the point here. One of the actors we are working with is the Argentinian network of municipalities. They are focused on small and medium cities that vary from 150 people to 1.5 million people. For COP22, we worked with them on building a declaration of commitments by these municipalities, especially in mitigation, some things on adaptations as well. During this year, we worked with them on strengthening these commitments. Now, many of the municipalities did enter the Compact of Mayors. And most interesting, they are contributing directly to the NDC revision of Argentina. During this year, the Argentinian government built the process for revising the NDC through multi-stakeholder roundtables around teams. And these municipalities, they worked on templates saying what they are going to do based on the commitments that were raised before, but going much more in details on their targets. Like some of the municipalities, small municipalities, worked on documents with over 30 pages, specifying which actions on mitigation adaptations they will do. And this is being integrated now on the Argentinian NDC. And throughout the next year, the idea is to continue this discussion on implementation. And through Action Lac, we are following this process and supporting on the really demand-driven on where the needs are to build this institutional capacity to be able to participate in this agenda with technical strength, dialoguing with the narratives and understanding what the benefits and challenges are. And I think also most important, thinking of the regional approach, how municipalities in Argentina, for example, can exchange and learn lessons with municipalities in Chile or other parts, right? And just, I will be very brief. 2 other examples. One of them is with small farmers in the Chaco region. The Chaco is the 2nd biggest biome in Latin America. It's in Argentina, in Paraguay, and in Bolivia. So it's a transnational approach. In this region, there's the Pilcomayo River, which has important risks in terms of drought. And the transnational approach is very important on how do we manage this river and how do farmers exchange practices and also information on monitoring and early warning systems. So we are working with them on building commitments from a biome approach for adaptation. And in the case of Argentina, the commitments or the actions being designed for the Argentinian Chaco are also in direct dialogue with the government. So we can see how these processes, when they are looked at from the geographic point of view, combining with the sectoral approach, we can gain much strength and connection with the NDCs and responding to all the challenges that there are. So just to share briefly what we are working on. We are at an early stage. We are, I think one important thing is an open platform, willing to build partnerships, not only with networks working on action and commitments, but also with partners that can bring technical expertise, connection to global arenas, connection to best practices. We are really willing to build this together with others. So I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. So we actually achieved what many side events don't achieve, and that's that we have a lot of time left for questions, which I think is fantastic. So are there any questions already in the audience? If not, I see a question over there and a question in the front. Frederica, could you maybe hand over there's mics here.
Hello, my name is Mariana Panuncio Feldman. I work for WWF. First of all, I just wanted to thank you all. The panel was fascinating. Lots of food for thoughts, and I have many questions, but I'll just start with one. I was actually very intrigued by your statement about embedding trust as part of the architecture, the policy framework, and I was wondering whether you could unpack that a bit more. Do you mean are you speaking about the trust that is built through accountability in terms of tracking? What components do you see in that embedding of trust? But thank you all. It was fantastic, very helpful.
I think we're collecting a few questions, so there's one at the back, gentlemen.
Good morning, John Honteley. I work for the Forest Stewardship Council. I have two questions. One is about the tool. I couldn't find it on your website yet, but I assume it will be there next week. But so will the tool be specific enough for me, for example, to find out what action is being taken related to forest in individual countries, of course, in light of the Paris Agreement? And then I had a question or comment to the presentation from Sweden. I understood you said something like that the problem in Sweden with your research was that people register activities, but that doesn't guarantee that they're being implemented. But I find it difficult to imagine that people develop activities in order to be registered. I guess registration is a very minor part of taking initiative. There are other motives to do so.
So I think, yeah, there's one question here at the front, and then the gentleman is back.
Hi, my name is Nadeem. I'm from Lead, Pakistan. I have a bit larger question that as you see NDC is in itself manifestation that developing countries assuming more role in climate action. And the unconditional commitments also is a reflection of that fact that developing country would play more role in climate actions in future. But I have a question that, and likewise the non-state actors are also coming. So they have a challenge to bypass their sovereign governments. So are the sovereign governments institutionally ready to allow these actors to interact with the international community, A, and B, all the international institutions are changing themselves, corresponding this increasing role of developing countries to play more decision-making in the global governance of climate action. So are they moving in parallel fashion, or do you see there's a gap and the institution need to speed up?
Yeah. And the gentleman at the back.
I'm Feng Hu from China to Risk. Just two questions to two speakers. One is for Sundar. When does your study look at the initiative from like bilateral cooperation or multilateral cooperation, such as like China's South China collaboration program that is also including SDG indicators and emission reduction in Global South? And the other question is to the Sweden case. And because I look at the website on the Nazca, and they basically just look at listed a commitment by some cities in Sweden. But I think if you look at commitment made by some like Asian countries, many cities they also have individual city emission reduction plans, which is because they don't have the English language or they didn't submit the commitment. but it's not included in the database. And for example, in China, we have more than 600 cities. If we all listed the commitment in the database, can easily beat the many of countries. But that's not the point. The point is, what is the accumulated total emission reduction made by these commitments, not the number of commitments. Thanks.
Thank you. Very diverse question, but for all of us who are in the panel, I guess, would you like to start, Idil, with the question from the lady from WWF?
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, thank you for your question. It's a great question. And so from what I understand, what you were asking is just to maybe reflect a little bit more on the concept of trust as embedded in the architecture. And so in fact, that's itself is something that is worth talking about. So I don't have some, prescriptive answer, but what I wanted to do is to highlight that, yes, the features of the transparency framework, such as tracking, accountability, those are very important. In fact, they are the backbones of the whole implementation process. But they're also very technical. And so what I wanted to highlight is the importance of reflecting on trust for coalitions and allegiances between actors at the ground level. And I think, in order to be able to have insights about the kind of more technical level at the implementation phase, we need to think about how trust building can occur and the conditions. So that's why I was highlighting the asymmetries of information as being one of the hazards that can prevent that kind of trust. But if we learn more and if we think more about the conditions on the ground involving real people, then we can reflect on how the conditions can be developed at the architectural level. And I think it would have to be an ongoing process, part of the long-term effort. But at the same time, we would have to start doing the work immediately, very much like the ambition gap. So start right away and then keep building. But thank you for your question.
I think we just follow the sequence of the questions. So I would be next in line to answer the question from the gentleman from the Forest Stewardship Council. As for the tool and the ways in which we include forest, there's a number of subcategories, both under mitigation and adaptation, where we deal with forests. So is it a priority sector in adaptation? To what extent and how is RED mentioned in NDCs? And also land use change. But I have to say that our tool is very much a first stepping stone for NDC analysis and comparison. So we intentionally did not want to be extremely specific on ways in which, in quote sentences and so on ways in which forest or RED Plus is included. But if you want an overview of how important this is to countries, how many countries included, in what way do they include it, then this is a tool to help you on your way. Basically to help you on your way to identify the kinds of NDCs that would be interesting or important for you to have a better look at. And that's partly the nature of the NDCs, because there are or there should be in the end 168 ones, and because of the limited guidance that I mentioned, they are extremely different in scope and content, so it makes them very difficult to compare and analyze actually. Then I think there was a question on whether registration, I think the question was for you, whether registration is enough.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the point I tried to make is that signing up to the Fossil-Free Sweden requires a lot less work than signing up for, say, the Nazca database. Signing up for the Fossil-Free Sweden is basically you go on a web page, you read the declaration, you sign, you get your name on the web page. So, for instance, for us, the institute I'm at, we signed up to the Fossil-Free Sweden, but we did not sign up. We tried to sign up to the Nazca, but we failed to live up to certain requirements. And I say, so that was one point I tried to make. It's much easier to sign up to this Fossil-Free Sweden. Then whether the, let's say, the incentive for doing something is that you register. No, I don't think so. In most cases, as you say, businesses, cities, they do they've got all different reasons for making different commitments, and maybe for a few of them, the ability to go on a UN webpage is a minor part, but still a part. But I think link, maybe if I could jump onto the other Swedish question as well, while I'm at it, is that, of course, there are so many things happening everywhere that is not on the Nazca database. So that was, when looking at the Nazca database, this is what we found, and we also found that there is a government-led initiative in Sweden encouraging non-state actors to sign up to the Nazca database, and that, of course, shows in the numbers. But limiting what's happening on city company level only to what happens at the Nazca database is, of course, insufficient. So you need to look at more initiatives, of course, but this paper was limited to the Nazca database. So that's perhaps at least partly a response to your question. Thank you.
Great. Pauw, would you also like to comment a bit on these questions, even though they were focused on Sweden, but you have a very interesting case?
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I would like to connect the cases and the importance of finding the incentives for actors to engage with the action agenda with trust, because I think that's directly connected. If we're talking about bringing new actors that maybe are doing great things on the ground, isolated, not with the strength or scale that we need, but already trying and innovating. If we want to bring them to global arenas, if we want to connect them to other actors and to bring scale, trust is a key element, especially if we are requiring them to show what they plan, what they have in mind as a vision in terms of commitments and targets. Because when you ask for a small farmer coalition, for example, to present commitments and targets and put them on a website, this brings also the perception of, okay, what will this mean for me in the future in terms of accountability, and what if I don't get the resources to do it? So trust is key element in this process, and also finding the right incentives for each of the different types of actors.
Okay, thanks. Then there was a question from, I think, from you at the front on conditionalities in NDCs. In our tool, we include a number of subcategories on countries. For example, if they make their adaptation contribution or the mitigation contribution conditional to finance, to capacity building, and also whether they make technology transfer, for example, a condition for the implementation of their NDCs. And we also have a subcategory where we say, do they make means of implementation, so finance, technology transfer, and capacity building, do they see it as part of the overall fairness of the Paris Agreement? Then I think there was a question for you, Sundar, or several ones actually, on non-state actors, whether this bypasses governments or whether it goes hand in hand. And there was a question on South-South cooperation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the questions also. On the relation between governments and climate action, and whether this is a relation that is marked by substitution or bypassing, I think we have seen a change here since Paris. When you're still negotiating, the role of non-state climate action, I would argue, might be more controversial, because it kind of directs attention away from kind of the main show. However, we are now we're entering the implementation phase of the climate agreement, but also of the sustainable development agenda. So the relation is now at a different level. It's about implementation now. And in that way, non-state climate actions could better relate to national target setting, where governments do have a stake in fulfilling what they have put on the table. So it becomes a little bit less controversial. However, I would say, like, generally, the scope for transnational action in different countries is different. This depends on political systems, for instance. Also the type of non-state action that is involved. For instance, one thing that is really underrepresented at fora, at COPs such as these, is the role of small and medium enterprises that are incredibly important to most developing countries, or for some big emerging countries, for instance, state-owned enterprises, which you also almost never see in technical examination processes here, for instance. Which maybe also brings me to the question about whether I looked at bi and multilateral cooperation. In this particular research I didn't, although we have developed a similar database with climate clubs, where the emphasis is more on multilateral, minilateral cooperation, I should say, between governments. Why we keep these research projects separately is because they relate in a different manner to the UNFCCC process. When you're talking about clubs, then again, it is very important, like whether it's undermining, for instance, or reinvigorating the international negotiations. The strength of the UNFCCC process is that it is universal, right? And of course, you can move faster in smaller clubs, but that undermines, the trust, which has also been a main theme in this panel. I do think that the discussion about clubs and transnational and non-state action comes from a similar place, namely the concern that what governments put on the table in international negotiations and what they implement just doesn't bring us there. And therefore, I think both on non-state action, transnational action, clubs, we do need to explore for all these elements of transnational governance, how they relate and how they can contribute to fulfilling the goals under the Paris Agreement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Oh, sorry. There was also, you also added the question about the link to sustainable development. I think I just want to briefly mention that this discussion on non-state and transnational actors has been playing, of course, in this wider sustainable development process. We have seen Nazca in the climate process, but similar platforms also in the sustainable development process. In a way, they are doing much the same, and they try to fulfill the same functions. So you could question like the mushrooming of these kind of platforms, or at least shouldn't they communicate more? And I think there is a scope for also multilateral cooperation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sundar. Before we go to the second round, I wanted to say to Paula that I think it's fantastic that Argentina is actually updating its INDC before it submits its NDC and enhancing ambition. In our tool, we show both INDC content, and you can compare it with NDC content. And so far, actually, like we were afraid that we would have to do massive data analysis, but unfortunately, there's only 3 countries that have really changed their INDC when they transformed it into an NDC. So Morocco is one of them, and there's Indonesia and in Argentina that are still planning to update it. If you're from another country that still has to submit its NDC, please take the chance to think about in enhancing ambition. Then we go to the next round of questions. Fingers, please. There's a lady at the front here.
Hello, my name's... Hello?
Yeah, it's on.
Hello? Okay. Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm with World Resources Institute, and my question actually touches exactly on what you just mentioned. I really liked the case that you explained on Argentina's network of municipalities embedding themselves into the process of NDC revision. And I'm curious if you could share some of the lessons from that exercise that could maybe be applied to other countries, without being too specific, I'm particularly thinking about some of the largest emitters. So that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. There's a question at the, there are two questions at the back.
There we go, perfect. Luke Kemp, Australian National University. Thank you for the presentations. I was wondering what in particular can be done for encouraging subnational action in countries which aren't covered by the Paris Agreement. I'm thinking in particular here for a Trump-led rogue US.
Thank you. My name is Kirtiman and I'm from GIZ, India. Sundar, in his presentation, talked about opportunities related to North-South research partnerships, for example, and also talked about bringing focus on emerging economies like India and China. This brings me to the question about, for example, India's NDCs, where the focus, large focus is on adaptation. And in terms of mitigation, the focus is on low carbon economy rather than emission reduction. Is this such deficit related to transnational climate action, related to, because most of these initiatives do not talk about or do not align with the national goals and objectives. For example, if you talk about emission reduction in India, government will probably not respond to your call.
Okay.
Rather than talking about low carbon economy and also bringing focus on adaptation. And there are examples, for examples, there's an India-ASEAN partnership on climate change. The focus is primarily on adaptation as a South-South cooperation. Okay. And how we can bring North in this South-South cooperation.
Is there a fourth question we can take?
Yeah.
Here in the front.
Hello, my name
you have a microphone already. Okay, sorry.
My name is Julio Rivera. I'm from Tufts University. And first of all, thank you very much for the talk to all of the participants. I would like to ask about the role and the room for the private sector to contribute toward the NDCs, and also the main barriers or challenges for them to engage, or for the governments to engage with them.
Okay. I think we can move to the second. Maybe Laura, would you like to take the word first for the question on Argentina?
Sure. Thank you. So I will answer, but I will also invite you to join a side event today at 5 p.m. By the Argentinian delegation at the PNUD Pavilion. Yeah, it's 5 p.m. So they're going to share a little bit on that. But from the perspective of the process of integrating non-state actors in that revision process, I would stress, I think, 3 points. One is key to have non-state actors prepared for when the dialogue opens. So there are, depending on the country, there are non-state actors prepared, but I think there's room for much more, and that's what we aim to do. In terms of understanding the agenda, the narratives, and being able to put their visions and actions in terms of targets. The second thing, I think, is having a structured, open dialogue process. So in the case of Argentina, there were multi-sectoral tables and also a template that was shared and which the municipalities could take home and work on that together with their team. So this is a structured process. And then the third thing would be this process. I think that's key. This was implemented now at the revision, and I understand that the idea is to continue for the implementation phase. And I think this is a key part of it too, in terms of lessons. And as Action Lab, what we are doing with the network of municipalities is opening a space to show and share what the contributions from the municipalities were, and track these contributions, these targets that the municipalities made. So we're going to put this on our website. We're working on that now. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks. And Sundar, maybe you would like to take the second and the third question?
Okay. I almost want to say thank you for bringing Trump in the discussion. I think what is interesting though is the changing governance context and also the changing narrative on subnational and non-state climate action. I think the dominant concern about non-state action before was that non-state action would be a substitute to actually harder commitments through international agreements, through governmental action. We saw on the road to Paris that this switched around, where the relationship is more mutually constitutive, where at the same time non-state actors contribute to the implementation of national targets, also put pressure on governments to sign up to a strong agreement, for instance. And that was a very, very sweet place to be at, I think. Now, I would almost say we risk to enter another era in which non-state action again becomes a substitute, but in a very different way, where non-state action becomes the default position if you want to talk about ambition. And it is not totally a bleak story, though. I mean, if I look within the US, for instance, California subnational action could set efficiency standards in the car industry, for instance, that have major implications for the whole of the country and even internationally by being such a big market, and influence climate action and ambition even without the federal government. So I would say it has become more important, actually, and we should actually talk more about non-state and subnational climate action given the recent developments in the US. But of course, this is not only about the US, and I thank you for the question by the gentleman in the back. And this is not only about mitigation. I outlined in my presentation why climate action in the South is so important. That on the one hand, it's a political question, it's a legitimacy question, but you cannot have a successful, effective global climate action agenda that contributes to the goals of the climate agreement without climate action on a truly global scale. And then it is very important to also recognize the non-mitigation contributions. We are talking about the link between non-state climate actions and NDCs. And we have to say that most NDCs are from relatively small countries, many of them developing countries, and we cannot expect too much in terms of mitigation on a global scale. We could reach a lot of mitigation targets by implementing some larger scale initiatives in emerging countries such as China and India, but mitigation in the SIDS, for instance, is less weighty on a global scale. However, these are countries that suffer most from currently occurring climate change. And the main contribution, I think, for these countries from non-state and subnational climate action may well be in adaptation. And that's why we also, for instance, organized global galvanizing the groundswell event in India to show what is going on there and how at a much lower, at a local level, you see adaptation actions by the private sector. And I'm happy to send you more information on that, also on that workshop.
just very quickly, I want to respond to Julio's question, tying to what we just heard. This is a very general framework, but maybe you can do some research on that. But one way in which I can see non-state actors, especially in the North-South relations, to contribute to the collective process is that they can actually help, they can provide assistance for capacity building. And this is something that maybe you can research more deeply. Thank you.
Daniel, you also wanted to respond to the question how the private sector can contribute to the NDC implementation.
Yeah, I think in general, and also linking back to what Sundar said, which I think is very important, the role of the small medium enterprises, that when you are engaging in the process of setting national climate targets, it's very often that you go to your major businesses with many employees and also quite often with quite heavy emissions, and they will of course have one stake in such a consultation. But if you also move to the small medium enterprises, often with newer technologies, they will have another stake in such a consultation. And I think what could be a key role of all these initiatives engaging businesses is that you make also the, let's say, the greener businesses, but also the smaller, medium-sized businesses to become stakeholders in this process. And I think this will be very valuable, and that goes across all countries, I think. So yeah, that was just my minor point.
We have like 2 minutes left for like 1 or 2 very urgent questions, if there are any. There's one at the front. Thomas?
Thank you to the panel for such a rich and interesting discussion. I just have 2 points I'd invite the panel's comments on that respond to some of the comments that were made in the room. First, there were a number of people who mentioned, well, why aren't we getting all the things that are happening onto Nazca? Why isn't that happening? And the answer is very simple. Nazca is a work in progress. It needs all of us as a community to contribute to its success. So if we know of data providers who can feed into Nazca, actions being taken that aren't there, let the Secretariat know. They're very eager to find more people. So it's sort of a message of how we can do that. And I invite the panel to think about how we might be able to do that more. And secondly, on the sort of substitute versus alternative question, I think we've really, with the Paris Agreement, changed that idea fundamentally. And actually, we're seeing how subnational action in a place like, well, the United States could actually be a firewall, a kind of not an enforcement mechanism, but something that makes it much harder for governments to go back on what they've agreed to, because it builds in at the local level and the real economy, real commitments that national governments can't easily undo, like they can easily undo certain national policies. So how can we make that really stick in the new version of the Paris Agreement? Are there other things we can do to reinforce the kind of commitment device that non-state action provides under the Paris Agreement?
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. Would somebody like, it was more of a comment than a question, I think, but if somebody would like to give a very brief response, please go ahead. Otherwise, I think the whole panel agrees with you. Sundar, you have one short comment.
Yeah, I take your last comment, Tom, as a question, like how to lock in the ambition nationally, like notwithstanding what kind of government. And I think it's very important to map where that ambition is and how we lock it in. For instance, well, it's hard to argue against the market once renewable energy is so much more competitive, and that is a driver for an enormous driver for non-state action, which is very, very hard to undo. You would need to have to put additional effort to undo it, and we have to look for those opportunities and maximize them. And I think we're very early in that discussion. Renewable energy might be one thing, but also like industrial standards at subnational level might be a good place to look at and start looking at.
Thank you very much, Sundar. In the meantime, I was informed that the link that is on the flyer to the NDC Explorer is actually functioning. So the question at the back almost gave me like a heart attack. What? It's not working. It is working. So with that, I would like to thank you all for coming. We will all keep working on these topics. So please reach out. And if we don't reach out to you. And then finally, of course, the final call for this, or well, not the final call, one of the first calls for this very important conference that we're organizing together with GIZ and the Galvanizing Groundswell Network in May. If you're interested, please also reach out. Thank you all for coming.
So much in such a short time. I was very nervous. Normally I would do it better, or I felt so rushed.